Good evening, night owls, and welcome back to Sleepless Politics, the late night corner of the internet where truth tastes better after midnight, and the stories we dig through aren't just bizarre. They cling to you long after you've closed the tab. Tonight's episode isn't just unsettling, it's the kind of tale that creeps in sideways, slipping past the part of your brain that says this can't be real, and settling right into the part that whispers, but what if it is? Because tonight, we're peeling back the curtain on a man who lived his public life beneath bright lights, microphones, and the endless chatter of cameras, yet spent his private life dodging shadows sharp enough to carve history in half. A man who should have died 32 times. A man who somehow didn't. Now, before we start tumbling into this labyrinth of accusations, explosions, mysterious car malfunctions, vanishing suspects, and political games played with stakes too high for daylight, do me one thing. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what ungodly hour it is for you. Every time you do, it maps out this strange constellation of sleepless thinkers scattered across the world, all tuned into the same frequency of curiosity and quiet dread. Now, settle in, lower the lights, let the world go still around you. Because tonight's tale isn't the story of a rogue operative or a vanished agent. It's something more unnerving than that. It's the story of a public figure, a man who shook hands, kissed babies, and made speeches on courthouse steps, while invisible crosshairs followed him from state to state, from city. Marcus Vale's story didn't begin with danger, not at first. In the early years, before the security briefings and tinted convoy windows, before the bomb sweeps and the burner phones and the whispered warnings from nameless officials, he was just another idealistic councilman in a city that prided itself on chewing up idealists. He came from a neighborhood where people learned early that promises were currency, cheap, plentiful, and worthless by the time the next election rolled around. Marcus grew up watching the men in tailored suits drive in with their smiles and clipboards, only to vanish once the camera stopped rolling. He remembered the sound of his mother's voice when she said, "If someone tells you they're here to help, boy, make sure you know who sent them and why." Most people heard that as cynicism. Marcus heard it as doctrine. So when he entered politics, he didn't run on hope or unity or any of the soft-focused slogans that decorate campaign flyers. He ran on disruption, on tearing out rot by its roots, on calling out names that had never been spoken aloud in public chambers, names tied to backroom deals, off-book budgets, and contracts that made certain men very, very rich. The first time he stood in front of the city council and read a list of embezzled funds connected to a construction project approved unanimously 2 years prior, the room went dead silent. Officially, it was stunned outrage. Unofficially, it was the kind of silence that comes when someone kicks the door to a secret room wide open. From that moment on, Marcus Vale stopped being an ambitious young politician and became something far more dangerous. A man who didn't know his place. The first attempt came 3 months later. He was driving home after a late-night budget session, the kind where everyone pretended to debate while quietly adjusting line items to please the right donors. It was raining, the cold, heavy kind that drowned sound and turned streetlights into blurry halos. Marcus remembered leaning forward in the driver's seat, tired, irritated, rehearsing the speech he planned to give the next morning. He didn't see the truck until the very last second. Witnesses later described it as a freak accident, a delivery vehicle skidding in the rain, losing control, barreling through a red light. If that were true, it would have been a tragedy. But Marcus's car wasn't simply hit. It was struck in the one exact spot that would crush the driver's side door. A perfect kill strike. If Marcus hadn't mistakenly taken his wife's car that night, a model with reinforced steel doors, because she had insisted on something safer after their son was born. The paramedics said he was lucky. His wife said it was divine intervention. Marcus didn't say anything, not publicly. But in the privacy of his hospital room, while the doctors murmured outside and the news channels speculated inside the waiting room, he replayed the impact in his head over and over. The angle, the speed, the precision. Accidents had patterns. This one felt like choreography. The second attempt came 2 months later, and that one wasn't so easy to write off. A malfunction in the elevators of City Hall, or so the maintenance report claimed, but Marcus had been the only council member inside when the cable snapped. The only reason he didn't plummet 8 floors was because the elevator jammed against a reinforced safety rail that inspectors later said shouldn't have held under that pressure. It held anyway, miraculously, conveniently. And as Marcus stepped out of the jammed metal box, his ears ringing, his knees shaking, he felt something in him shift, something fundamental. Fear, maybe, but not the kind that makes a person run. The kind that solidifies, crystallizes, and whispers, "You are not imagining this." That night, for the first time in his political life, Marcus Lale requested private security. Just one man, discreet, unmarked, someone who could watch without asking questions. And although he didn't say it out loud, not to his wife, not to his staff, not even to the mirror, Marcus knew 2 things with absolute certainty. Someone wanted him gone, and whatever he'd stumbled into, he had only brushed the surface. The third attempt was the one that forced Marcus Vail to abandon the idea that he could somehow navigate danger quietly, discreetly, without disturbing the machinery of politics around him. It happened on a morning so ordinary it should have been forgettable. The kind of morning where the biggest headline was a minor zoning dispute, and the phone calls on his schedule were routine, even boring. Marcus had agreed to speak at a community breakfast, a small gathering at a local recreation center. It was the sort of event politicians attended to be seen shaking hands, ladling pancakes, and reminding the public that they were one of them. Marcus hated these events, but he showed up anyway because he knew visibility mattered, and because avoiding the public would only feed whispers that he had something to hide. The recreation center was crowded, kids tugging at their parents, volunteers scrambling to refill trays of fruit, retirees telling stories no one had asked for. Marcus slipped into the rhythm easily, smiling, waving, shaking hands with people who looked at him with real gratitude. It reminded him, in strange, fleeting flashes, why he had entered politics in the first place. But then a sound cut through the chatter, a sharp pop, quick, crisp, unmistakable to anyone who had ever been near a firing range. The bullet missed Marcus by 4 inches. 4. It tore into a banner behind him, shredding the cloth, then embedding itself in the wall with a dull thud. At first, no one understood what had happened. A few people flinched, startled, others froze in confusion. But Marcus felt it instantly, the instinctive jolt of terror that shoots through the spine before the brain has time to form words. His newly hired private security officer, a former Marine named Ryland Shore, reacted before anyone else. He grabbed Marcus by the collar and dragged him behind a table stacked with paper plates and syrup dispensers, bellowing for everyone to get down. Chaos erupted, screams, scrambling, overturned chairs. Somewhere outside, tires squealed. By the time police arrived, the shooter was gone. Witnesses claimed they saw a figure in a dark hoodie sprinting between parked cars, but the descriptions were vague and conflicting. Security footage from the building's exterior cameras was corrupted, a glitch, according to the technician. A glitch that conveniently affected that exact hour of recording and no other. Marcus sat in the back of an ambulance, long after the crowd had cleared, staring at the shredded banner. His hands shook, not from fear, but from something colder, something sharper, a precise, distant anger. When the detectives finally approached him, one of them asked what he believed the motive was. Political, Marcus said. No doubt in my mind. The detective's expression was sympathetic, but not convinced. Marcus didn't care. He wasn't trying to convince anyone. He was done pretending. That night, he reviewed the last 6 months. Every vote he pushed through, every investigation he initiated, every audit he demanded. Patterns emerged, names surfaced, and a realization dawned on him with the force of a hammer. These attempts weren't random outbursts from desperate individuals. They were coordinated. Someone, or a coalition of someone's, had decided Marcus Vail was a threat to be neutralized. A new kind of exhaustion took root in him. Not the exhaustion of overwork, but the exhaustion of stepping into a battlefield that had always existed, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment he opened the wrong door. And he had opened it, wide. Marcus called Ryland Shore into his home office, locking the door behind them. We need a full security detail, rotating shifts, background checks, armored transportation, everything. Ryland didn't respond immediately. He simply studied Marcus with the quiet, assessing eyes of a man who had seen more battlefields than birthdays. Sir, he finally said, this won't end the way you think. I know, but it won't end the way they think either. Ryland nodded once slowly. Then we prepare. And with that, Marcus Vail, councilman, reformer, idealist, took his first deliberate step into the shadows that had already been hunting him. The fourth attempt didn't come in the form of a dramatic showdown. No gunman perched on a rooftop, no sabotaged vehicle hurtling toward a guardrail, no sudden malfunction sending him plunging into elevator shafts. It came disguised as something far more insidious, a warning dressed as misfortune, wrapped in the polite language of bureaucratic procedure. It happened during the early months of Marcus's transition from local politics into the broader, hungrier territory of statewide influence. He had announced an anti-corruption initiative, a proposal that demanded full transparency of corporate donors, exposed shell companies that funneled money into campaigns, and called for a complete overhaul of the contracts awarded to major construction firms. On paper, it was a reformist dream. Behind closed doors, it was a declaration of war. The first sign that something was wrong came when Marcus received a letter, a thin white envelope with no return address, slipped under the door of his private office. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no signature, just one sentence typed dead center. You are making powerful enemies. Stop now. Marcus showed it to no one, not because he dismissed it, but because he knew it meant someone was testing him, not his fear, but his resolve. He folded the note, slid it into a file labeled miscellaneous correspondence, and kept working. It would have been easy to shrug it off as a prank if not for what happened 48 hours later. His computer crashed. Not the kind of crash caused by a glitch or outdated software, but a deliberate surgical attack. Every file connected to his anti-corruption research was wiped clean, erased in a way that suggested professional hands. IT specialists blamed a rare ransomware-like event, but Marcus noticed something peculiar. None of his other files were touched. Not his emails, not his schedules, not his personal notes. Someone had known exactly what to hit and why. Then came the audits. 3 separate state agencies, each claiming coincidence, launched sudden invasive reviews into Marcus's finances, his campaign expenditures, even his family's tax filings. Reporters began calling his office, asking if he wanted to comment on emerging concerns. His opponents on the council, emboldened by anonymous sources, started raising questions about his ethics, delivering carefully crafted sound bites that spread across local news like slow poison. None of the allegations held. Every audit eventually came back clean. But the damage wasn't meant to incriminate him. It was meant to overwhelm, destabilize, distract. A softer form of assassination. Character first, body second. Marcus understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't the work of one person or even one organization. It was a network, a web of influence stretching far beyond city limits, reaching into state departments, corporate offices, media outlets. People working together not out of shared loyalty, but shared interest. Silence him before he becomes too big to silence. Ryland Shore tracked patterns with military precision. He mapped dates, connections, and financial links between the companies Marcus had targeted in his reform proposal. The more he uncovered, the more uneasy he became. "This isn't a political pushback," Ryland said one night, spreading documents across Marcus's dining table. "This is coordinated pressure, multiple factions. Whoever's behind this has money, media, and friends in government." Marcus leaned over the papers, scanning the highlighted names, the dates, the cross-checked donations, the list of legislative decisions that seemed to shift suspiciously whenever certain figures were involved. It was dizzying, infuriating, and clarifying. Marcus murmured, "They're not trying to scare me. They're trying to bury me in noise." Ryland replied, "Noise is a tactic. Noise creates confusion. Confusion creates hesitation. Hesitation gets people killed." Marcus stared at him. "You think another attempt is coming?" Ryland didn't hesitate. "No," he said. "I think several are." And he was right. Less than a week later, Marcus found himself stepping into the center of a more direct threat. The kind that didn't hide behind paperwork or technology. The kind that stood in front of him, real and immediate, forcing him to accept that the game had escalated. Because the fourth attempt came not from the shadows, but from someone he knew, someone he trusted, someone who was supposed to protect him. The fourth attempt had shaken Marcus, but the fifth nearly broke something inside him. Not his resolve, but his understanding of what loyalty meant in a world where power bent people like heat-warped metal. It happened on a night that should have been safe, controlled, predictable. Marcus was attending a closed-door strategy meeting with his inner circle, a group of staffers, consultants, and longtime allies who had been with him from the beginning. These were people who had knocked on doors for him during his first campaign, who had helped him draft speeches at 2 a.m, who had sat across from him in diners with maps and notes spread out between cups of burnt coffee. These were people he trusted, people he believed he knew. The meeting was held in a private conference room inside a hotel known for its discretion and thick walls, chosen specifically because of the recent threats. Ryland Shore had swept the room beforehand, checking vents, corners, and any place a microphone could be hidden. Everything came back clean. The table was cluttered with documents, policy drafts, funding breakdowns, voter demographics, security recommendations. Marcus stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, deep in the kind of focused intensity that brought out both fear and admiration in the people around him. But halfway through the discussion, Ryland's posture changed. It was subtle, just a shift, a tensing of muscles, a narrowing of his eyes toward the back of the room where one staffer, Daniel Haverford, sat quietly taking notes. Daniel had been with Marcus for years, soft-spoken, detail-oriented, the kind of man who remembered everyone's birthdays, who stayed late without complaint, who never raised his voice. Ryland stepped away from the wall, moving slowly, deliberately. Marcus noticed, but kept speaking, assuming Ryland had detected some external issue. But he hadn't. Ryland stopped behind Daniel and rested a hand lightly on the back of his chair. "Daniel," Ryland said, voice calm but edged with steel, "put your hands on the table." The room froze. Daniel looked up, startled, laughing nervously. "Ryland, what?" "Hands," Ryland repeated. Daniel complied, palms flat, fingers trembling. Ryland's other hand slipped beneath Daniel's jacket and emerged with a weapon, a compact pistol taped to the inside lining. Gasps erupted. Marcus's stomach dropped. Daniel stammered something, protests, explanations, half-sentences that never formed into anything coherent. He could barely hear him over the thudding in his own chest. "It's not what it looks like. I swear I wasn't going to. Someone told me." Ryland cut him off sharply. "Save it." The gun hit the table with a sharp clatter. Daniel broke. Tears streamed down his face as everything inside him collapsed at once. "They threatened my wife, my kids. They knew where they went to school. They said if I didn't do it, if I didn't get close, someone else would, and they wouldn't make it quick." Silence swallowed the room. Daniel was shaking uncontrollably, eyes pleading, begging for something, mercy, forgiveness, understanding, anything. Marcus felt something inside him twist. Betrayal wasn't simple, not like movies made it seem. It wasn't clean, it wasn't sharp, it was heavy, slow, suffocating. "Daniel," Marcus said softly, "why didn't you come to me?" Daniel's answer came like a child's confession. "Because they said you were already dead." Ryland escorted Daniel out as the rest of the team sat in shock, trying to absorb the enormity of what had just unfolded. The weapon was real, the threat was real, and the implications were staggering. If someone had gotten to Daniel, quiet, harmless Daniel, then no one in Marcus's orbit was safe. Marcus pressed his palms against the table, leaning heavily, breath unsteady. The room felt smaller, darker. "We have a mole," one staffer said. "No," another countered. "We have a network." But Marcus knew better. They didn't have infiltrators. They had predators. People who didn't need to buy loyalty. They could manufacture desperation. Marcus's voice trembled, not with fear, but with fury. "If they think this is going to stop me, they don't understand me at all." Ryland returned, closing the door behind him. This wasn't the last attempt, not even close. Marcus nodded slowly. "Then neither is our fight." And with that, he stepped fully into a world where trust had fractures, loyalty had limits, and survival was no longer a matter of instinct, it was strategy. By the time the sixth attempt arrived, Marcus Vale had stopped believing in coincidences entirely. He moved through his days like a man navigating a minefield, every handshake a potential threat, every casual glance a possible signal. The sixth attempt wasn't dramatic in the way most would imagine. There were no bullets, no explosions, no car crashes. It came cloaked in the most mundane, insidious weapon imaginable, a medical emergency. Marcus had been under constant stress for months, the kind that seeps into muscles, frays nerves, and clouds judgment. Still, he prided himself on maintaining a routine. Exercise, diet, daily checkups. Yet one morning, his personal physician called urgently, insisting he come in immediately. Marcus brushed it off at first, assuming it was nothing more than an overcautious doctor. But Ryland's instincts kicked in. "Don't go alone," he said, his voice low, clipped. "Not today." Against his usual habit of independence, Marcus relented. The drive to the clinic was tense but uneventful. He tried to relax, recounting the speeches he'd prepared for the upcoming week, forcing his mind away from the paranoia that had become second nature. Then the subtle signs began. The receptionist who seemed to avoid eye contact, the nurse who walked past too quickly, the doctor's tone that carried just a hint too much urgency. When Marcus was finally ushered into the examination room, he noticed the medical equipment had been tampered with. Lines disconnected, syringes mislaid, monitors showing irregular readings. His blood pressure monitor spiked, yet he felt fine. His pulse raced, despite calm breathing. Ryland leaned against the wall, scanning everything with practiced vigilance. "Something's off," he murmured, more to himself than to Marcus. Minutes later, a nurse stepped forward, suggesting an emergency procedure, one Marcus didn't need, one that made no medical sense. She insisted, almost pleading, that he allow a sedative injection to stabilize him. Marcus froze. His gut screamed, Ryland's presence a lifeline. "No," Marcus said firmly. "I won't do it." The nurse hesitated, a flicker of something passing across her face. Fear? Hesitation? Recognition that her plan was unraveling, before backing away. In the hallway, Ryland intercepted her and quietly forced a confession. Someone on the staff had been instructed to administer a sedative that would leave Marcus incapacitated for hours. That window would have been enough. Hours was all a team needed to execute a more direct strike. The word assassination no longer felt like exaggeration. It was literal, clinical, and chillingly precise. Marcus left the clinic shaken but alive. Later that night, he pored over reports, hospital records, and security logs, trying to trace the chain of complicity. Names repeated, departments repeated, loops of bureaucracy and oversight designed to protect the institution instead became instruments of danger. Whoever orchestrated this knew this system intimately. They knew Marcus's habits, his schedules, the people he trusted. And yet, despite the fear, despite the manipulation, a strange clarity emerged. This attempt, more than any before it, highlighted the stakes. It was no longer about politics, or ideology, or even control. This was about survival. Marcus began to sleep with the knowledge that sleep itself could be weaponized. He studied maps of his house, memorized escape routes, installed surveillance far beyond normal measures, even compared the tiniest inconsistencies in the routines of those closest to him. Every meal, every meeting, every phone call became a calculated risk. He grew silent, observing, listening, waiting. And as the night deepened, Marcus understood something fundamental. The attempts were never random. Each one had a purpose. Each one tested him, probed his limits, measured his responses. Surviving wasn't enough. He had to anticipate, outmaneuver, and strike preemptively, sometimes mentally, sometimes strategically, sometimes through sheer presence that refused to be eliminated. By now, the legend of Marcus Vale had begun to spread quietly through political circles. The seventh attempt arrived with an elegance that was terrifying in its simplicity. Unlike the chaotic violence of bullets or the deception of a tampered medical procedure, this one came cloaked in the guise of an accident, something that could be dismissed, rationalized, even forgotten. It was a private dinner at a restaurant Marcus frequented for years, a quiet place chosen for its anonymity and the familiarity of its staff. He sat at a corner table, Ryland at his side, reviewing speech notes for an upcoming press conference. The candlelight flickered across Marcus's face, casting shadows that seemed more menacing than the ones lurking in the corners of his life. Midway through the evening, a server brought over a bottle of wine, a vintage Marcus didn't recognize. It had been selected for him, delivered with a polite nod, and seemed entirely ordinary. But Marcus had learned to notice anomalies, even the smallest ones. Something about the cork felt off, the smell of the wine too sharp, the color a little darker than it should have been. He froze, setting the glass down. Ryland's gaze followed his hand, and a subtle nod passed between them, a silent understanding that the night's ordinary facade was about to collapse. The server lingered, smiling, asking if everything was satisfactory. Marcus, voice steady, said yes. Inside, every muscle in his body tensed. When the server turned, Ryland acted, stepping lightly to intercept the bottle, twisting it from the server's hands. The glass shattered on the floor. The man tried to protest, but Ryland's grip tightened, eyes locked. Marcus didn't speak, he simply watched, a cold calculation settling in him. Later, once the staff had been reassured and the threat had dissipated, Ryland explains the discovery. Traces of a rare, fast-acting toxin had been detected on the cork, capable of incapacitating or killing within minutes if consumed. Marcus's stomach turned at the realization, and yet, strangely, he felt a grim sense of confirmation. The world he had stepped into, willingly or not, was meticulous in its cruelty. Whoever orchestrated these attacks had patience, precision, and the resources to manipulate even the most mundane situations. It wasn't just about elimination anymore. It was about demonstrating reach, control, the ability to puncture every layer of his life with the faintest touch. By now, the pattern was unmistakable. Accidents, threats, and conspiracies formed a continuum, each one escalating in sophistication. Every incident built upon the previous, creating a web of danger designed to destabilize Marcus psychologically, forcing him to second-guess every person, every object, every environment. Yet even under the relentless weight of these attempts, Marcus's resolve hardened. Where fear once existed, now there was calculation. Where doubt had crept in, now there was strategy. He studied the notes left by those who had tried and failed, compiling a mental catalog of vulnerabilities and countermeasures. His staff adapted, moving in shifts, checking supplies, inspecting every object that entered their spaces. Surveillance expanded beyond the usual cameras and alarms. Marcus's home became a labyrinth of sensors and hidden devices, a place where even the walls seemed to have eyes. Through it all, Marcus understood a fundamental truth. Survival wasn't passive. It required engagement, constant vigilance, and the willingness to anticipate threats before they materialized. But even with all precautions, there was a cost. Sleep became a fragile illusion, conversation a measured act, and public appearances a theater where even smiles were carefully timed. Yet despite the exhaustion, the fear, and the isolation, Marcus felt something others could not see. A strange exhilaration, a sharp clarity born from dancing so close to death that life itself became vivid, immediate, and unavoidable. And as the night drew to a close, Marcus returned to his private study, reviewing the events of the day with meticulous detail. Each small victory, each narrowly avoided catastrophe, each failure that became a lesson was etched into his memory. He circled names, drew lines between events, and mapped patterns that others could not perceive. Somewhere in the labyrinthine network of threats and enemies, a message had been sent. Marcus Vale was being hunted, challenged, tested. And somewhere else, another network of shadows whispered back, the hunt had not yet concluded. As he sat there alone, with the faint glow of his desk lamp illuminating the pages before him, Marcus allowed himself a single thought, whispered quietly but with the conviction of steel. They will not succeed, not while I breathe, not while I stand. And in that moment, he understood fully what it meant to live a life threaded through danger, a life where every heartbeat was measured, every breath a gamble, and survival itself was an act of defiance. By the time the eighth attempt occurred, Marcus Vale's life had become a precarious balance between visibility and invisibility, between acting as a public figure and existing as a ghost moving through his own life. The attack itself was audacious in its simplicity, a car bomb planted beneath a vehicle he had driven countless times. Ryland had insisted on driving that day, citing concerns about Marcus's unpredictable schedule. But Marcus, stubborn as ever, had insisted on taking the wheel himself for the morning commute to a legislative session. It was a short drive, just 15 minutes through familiar streets, yet Marcus sensed unease from the moment he stepped outside. The air felt heavy, too still. A faint sense of gasoline lingered where there shouldn't have been any. And then, as he turned the corner toward the main boulevard, a flash of movement caught his eye, a glint under the car parked near the curb. Instinct kicked in. Marcus slammed the brakes, leaping from the vehicle just as the explosion ripped through the air with a deafening roar. The shock wave hurled debris across the street, shattered windows in nearby buildings, and sent pedestrians diving to the ground. Ryland, behind him in the follow car, pulled Marcus back, adrenaline and fury mingling in equal measure. "That was too close," Ryland muttered, checking the surrounding streets for anything suspicious. Marcus didn't reply immediately. Instead, he surveyed the carnage with cold precision. Someone had known the exact time he would be in the car, the exact route he would take. This wasn't improvisation. It was planning, patience, calculation. It was a professional, deliberate attempt on his life. And it had failed, only because Marcus had chosen, against advice, to do the simplest thing: pay attention. Later that evening, Marcus examined the remains of the car under security lights. The mechanics confirmed what Ryland had suspected. The bomb had been placed under the frame, timed to detonate precisely at the moment the ignition reached a certain threshold. Whoever built it understood Marcus's schedule, his habits, and his predictable routines. This was not random violence. It was targeted precision. The sheer audacity of the attempt, coupled with the sophistication of the device, sent a clear message: we can reach you anywhere. But Marcus's response was equally deliberate. He didn't cancel appearances. He didn't hide behind walls. He expanded his strategy, adding unpredictability to his movements, rotating vehicles, changing departure times, and varying routes in ways that only someone as meticulous as Ryland could coordinate. Every day became a chess match, with Marcus always 3 moves ahead, sometimes 4. By now, the accumulation of attempts had begun to shape him in ways outsiders would never fully understand. Friends, colleagues, and even family could not grasp the psychological toll of living every day under the shadow of meticulously orchestrated murder. Yet, Marcus had adapted. He had become something almost otherworldly in his awareness, a man who could read patterns in chaos, anticipate threats before they manifested, and manipulate appearances to mislead those who sought his life. And in the rare moments of solitude, when the world seemed to hold its breath, Marcus allowed himself one stark, unflinching thought. He was no longer a politician in the ordinary sense. He was a survivor of war waged in the shadows of power, a man whose life had become a living testament to both the fragility and resilience of human will. By nightfall, after reviewing surveillance footage, bomb mechanics reports, and timelines of all the previous attempts, Marcus made a decision. The public persona of Marcus Vale would continue to stand, strong and unyielding, but the man behind the curtain, the one who truly navigated danger, would remain unseen, untouchable, and unpredictable. And with that resolve, he prepared for the next day, for the next threat, and for the next attempt. A cycle that would continue for years, each incident sharpening his mind, refining his instincts, and forging him into something far more formidable than anyone, friend or foe, could imagine. The ninth attempt arrived in a form so subtle, so meticulously disguised, that Marcus almost didn't recognize it as an attack until it was nearly too late. It happened during a routine political fundraiser at a luxury hotel ballroom, an event so meticulously planned that every guest had been vetted and every item on the menu accounted for. Marcus had learned by now that the most effective threats were the ones no one noticed until the consequences were irreversible. He mingled with donors and supporters, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, and delivering carefully honed lines about reform and accountability. Rylan moved at his side, scanning the crowd with the patient intensity of a hunter who had learned that the prey often wore a mask of normalcy. Everything appeared ordinary. The band played, glasses clinked, and laughter floated across the chandelier-lit hall. But Marcus's instincts, honed through years of narrowly avoiding death, picked up a faint anomaly. The bartender, an employee of long-standing reputation, seemed distracted. The way he poured drinks, the angle of his wrist, the subtle hesitation between movements, all triggered a mental alarm. Marcus signaled Rylan subtly, directing him toward the bar. As Rylan approached, the bartender's nervous glance toward Marcus was enough to confirm suspicion. The drinks, it turned out, had been laced with a rare neurotoxin, one that would have left Marcus incapacitated within minutes, unable to respond to an immediate threat. Rylan intercepted the bottles, discreetly replacing them with safe ones before anyone could notice. The operation was elegant and chilling. It relied on trust, familiarity, and routine to bypass every other safeguard. Marcus, witnessing this, felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief that he had survived another attempt. Dread because the sophistication of the plot confirmed a terrifying reality. Whoever was orchestrating these attacks had resources, patience, and insight into his daily life that should have been impossible. After the event, Marcus convened a closed meeting with his security team and closest aides. He spread out notes, photographs, and schedules across the table, outlining the pattern of attacks. "They're learning," Marcus said, voice tight. "Each attempt is more sophisticated than the last. They study us, anticipate us, and then strike in ways that leave no trace. This is no longer about politics. It's a war of attrition. They want to break us." The team exchanged glances, some silent, others tense. Rylan added, "We've been lucky, but luck isn't strategy. We need to evolve faster than they do. If we don't, the next attempt could succeed." Marcus leaned back, absorbing the weight of the room, the gravity of every word. His life had become a series of calculations. Every handshake, every meal, every interaction had to be scrutinized, anticipated, controlled. Yet even in the face of this relentless pressure, he felt something else, a strange exhilaration, a clarity born from living on the razor's edge. Every survival reinforced his understanding that he was no longer merely a politician. He had become a master of anticipation, a strategist in a hidden war waged against forces most people would never notice, much less comprehend. By nightfall, Marcus returned home exhausted, but alert. He reviewed the day's events meticulously, noting the minor details that could serve as clues for future threats. The subtle nervous glance, the slight hesitation, the angle of a pour, each became a data point in the growing map of the enemy's methods. He realized that this attempt, like the others, was not meant to kill immediately. It was designed to test him, probe his defenses, and measure reactions. And Marcus Vale, survivor of 9 deliberate attempts on his life, had learned to read these signs with near-perfect precision. Sitting alone in his study, staring at the organized chaos of maps, notes, and security footage, he whispered a statement of resolution that had become almost a mantra. They adapt. So do I. They plan. So do I. And I will not fall. Not now. Not ever. Outside, the city carried on in oblivion, unaware of the silent war being waged in its midst. Inside, Marcus Vail was sharpening his mind, fortifying his strategies, and preparing for the next step in a journey that had already defied every expectation of survival. The 10th attempt was unlike any Marcus Vail had faced before, not because it was physically violent, but because it targeted something far more vulnerable, his mind. After surviving 9 previous attacks, each one a narrowly avoided catastrophe, Marcus had developed an almost preternatural ability to anticipate danger, to read subtle patterns, to detect threats invisible to anyone else. Yet the 10th attempt sought to exploit his curiosity, his intellect, and the very instincts that had kept him alive. It began with an anonymous package delivered to his office by a courier who vanished as quietly as he arrived. Inside was a folder filled with carefully assembled documents, emails, and photographs suggesting that a shadow network of political operatives had infiltrated the offices of key lawmakers. The files hinted at secret deals, illicit donations, and votes traded like currency, all directly affecting legislation Marcus had championed. The temptation to investigate was immediate and powerful. Every instinct Marcus had told him that ignoring this could allow corruption to flourish, that failing to act could undermine everything he had worked for. But he also recognized the signature of danger. The intelligence was designed to lure him into a trap. The instructions included a request to meet a supposed whistleblower in a remote location late at night. Anyone who had studied Marcus, as his enemies clearly had, would know that he could not resist uncovering a conspiracy firsthand. The setup was brilliant, terrifying in its subtlety. Marcus did not go. Instead, he orchestrated a careful plan, decoy schedules, falsified digital trails, and the deployment of Ryland to act as his stand-in. Every detail was constructed to convince the perpetrators that Marcus had walked into their trap. That night, Marcus watched from a secure location as Ryland arrived at the designated site. Moments later, an operative appeared, a professional, confident and precise, ready to strike. But their anticipation crumbled the instant they realized the wrong person was there. Panic flashed across their face, a reaction Marcus had studied with grim satisfaction. The trap had failed. From a distance, Marcus observed the operatives' confusion, the realization that their prey had outmaneuvered them, and for the first time in hours, he allowed a flicker of grim satisfaction. This attempt was as much psychological as it was operational. The attackers sought to manipulate his behavior, predict his moves, and create an illusion of control over him. Marcus had anticipated all of it. He understood that surviving this game required more than vigilance. It demanded deception, misdirection, and the ability to remain unpredictable. Later, in the quiet of his study, Marcus reviewed the events of the night. He mapped connections, patterns, and contingencies, cataloging every possible vulnerability. "They're clever," he murmured, tracing lines between emails and files, but not clever enough. His staff, fully aware of the near miss, understood the gravity. This was no longer about eliminating a political rival. This was a systematic campaign to control his every thought, to manipulate his reactions, and to wear him down until he made a mistake. Marcus refused to yield. Every attack, every near-death experience had taught him lessons no one else could grasp. The threats were evolving, but so was he. Survival had become both art and science, requiring strategy, foresight, and the relentless mental discipline of someone who had stared death in the eye more times than most people could count. That night, Marcus Vail leaned back in his chair, the glow of his desk lamp illuminating his meticulously arranged maps, notes, and surveillance footage. He whispered to himself almost reverently, "They can plan all they want. They can anticipate all they can imagine. But I am not their predictable victim. I am their anomaly. Outside, the city moved on obliviously, unaware of the hidden war raging in the shadows. Inside, Marcus's mind raced, already preparing for the next challenge, the next attempt, the next inevitable strike. He had survived 10 times, but he knew the journey was far from over, and he intended to survive every single attempt, no matter how sophisticated, no matter how clever, no matter how deadly. By the 11th attempt, Marcus Vale had become something entirely different from the man who had once walked into City Hall, full of idealism and ambition. Survival had reshaped him into a strategist, a predator in a landscape that most people believed was orderly and mundane. This attempt, unlike many before it, was both brutal and subtle. An infiltration from within his closest circle, executed with patience and precision. Marcus had always trusted a small inner team of aides and assistants, people who had followed him from his earliest campaigns and shared his vision of reform. But experience had taught him that loyalty could be manipulated. The first sign of the 11th attempt came not as a weapon or explosion, but as a casual remark, a suggestion that he alter his schedule for a routine legislative visit. The tone was polite, even helpful, but Marcus sensed the subtle tension in the voice of the aide who made it. Something about the insistence felt rehearsed, forced, unnatural. He asked Ryland to review the security footage and phone logs surrounding the request. At first, nothing appeared amiss, but patterns emerged as he examined timestamps, cross-referenced messages, and analyzed the movements of people who had access to his schedule. The discovery was chilling. Someone had been monitoring him for weeks, compiling data to manipulate his movements into a vulnerable position. The target location was a familiar one, a conference hall he had used countless times. The plan was audacious in its simplicity: lure him into a controlled environment where the attackers could strike with minimal witnesses and maximum efficiency. Marcus's response was surgical. He implemented decoy routines, switched vehicles, and sent Ryland and a secondary team to the location under the pretense that Marcus would attend. Every angle, every possible breach was accounted for. That evening, Marcus monitored the operation from a secure location nearby, watching as the would-be attackers executed their plan flawlessly, right up to the point where their intended target failed to appear. Frustration was evident in their movements. Their patience was tested. Their confidence faltered. Marcus allowed himself the satisfaction of watching the trap collapse, knowing the intelligence they had gathered had been fed back to them in a carefully orchestrated lie. But the attempt left scars in unexpected ways. It forced Marcus to confront the uncomfortable truth that no circle of trust was impervious. Every team member, every aide, every associate could be compromised, not necessarily by choice, but through coercion, fear, or manipulation. He redoubled his security protocols, revising methods of communication, vetting every individual with renewed scrutiny, and implementing surveillance even on those he had once trusted implicitly. This attempt also brought him a new clarity. Marcus realized that surviving assassination attempts was no longer just about evading danger. It was about understanding the psychology of the enemy. Each attempt carried a signature, a lesson, a message. They wanted him fearful, isolated, and hesitant. Fear was the tool they wielded as sharply as any blade or firearm. He needed to turn it into a weapon instead. By midnight, Marcus was alone in his study, reviewing the day's events and the accumulated intelligence from all previous attempts. He meticulously cataloged names, dates, methods, and connections, building a map of both overt and covert threats. His walls were lined with files, photographs, and diagrams, each one representing a moment in a battle invisible to the public eye. The reality of the 11th attempt reinforced what he had long suspected. Survival was not accidental, and it required absolute control over one's environment, thoughts, and decisions. And yet, despite the weight of the threat, Marcus felt a strange exhilaration. Each attempt sharpened him, honed his instincts, and confirmed his ability to outthink those who sought to end him. Where others might have felt despair, he felt mastery. Where others might have wavered, he found resolve. Survival had become a craft, and Marcus Vail was, unwillingly, its most meticulous practitioner. As he stared at the map on his wall, tracing lines between past attempts and anticipating future ones, he whispered to himself, "They think they know me. They think they can predict me. But every move they make only teaches me how to survive and how to strike back." Outside, the city carried on, unaware of the hidden war waging within its streets and buildings. Inside, Marcus Vail prepared for the next. The 12th attempt was one that forced Marcus Vail to confront the fragility of even the most carefully constructed defenses. By now, he had survived numerous attacks, bullets, bombs, tampered vehicles, poisoned drinks, and even psychological traps. But nothing could fully prepare him for an attempt that struck at his most human vulnerability: trust. It began with a call, late at night, from someone claiming to have vital information regarding a covert deal that could compromise legislation Marcus had been fighting for months. The caller sounded urgent but measured, a voice trained to persuade, to instill belief without raising suspicion. Marcus's initial instinct was caution. Years of surviving high-stakes threats had honed his skepticism. Yet something in the cadence, the detail, the specificity of the information made him pause. Could this truly be genuine intelligence? Could it be real? Or was it simply the latest ploy to draw him out, isolated and unprotected? He didn't know, and that uncertainty was precisely what his enemies counted on. He arranged a meeting, but not in person. Marcus set up an elaborate test. The information would be delivered to a decoy location, and Ryland would observe interactions, collect evidence, and assess the credibility of the messenger. Everything was executed with meticulous attention to detail. Surveillance cameras positioned to cover every angle, emergency escape routes prepared, and redundancies built into the plan. Marcus watched remotely, heart pounding in a mixture of anticipation and dread. When the messenger arrived, they were professional, composed, and meticulous, everything Marcus had learned to expect from operatives who had